Let me call the meeting to order and announce who's here. I'm Alan Lewis. I am the chair of the select board. We have Barney Arnold, who is the assistant vice chair, David Modell, the clerk, Kate Reed, select board emeritus, and Luke Ascalillo, who is select board emeritus, and Tim Goddard for town administrator is also on. And welcome to those joining us this evening. I see Mary Lynn is here from the Mosquito, Jeannie Janesco, who is a regular attendee, Christina, thank you for being here, and Stacy, thank you for being here, and Jen Gibbons, who will be taking the minutes. I'll go over the proposed agenda. At 7 o'clock, we will have community input. 7:05, the LEPC update. Chief Fisher cannot join us this evening, so I will be giving that. 7:15, the Gleason Library trustees to discuss paid family medical leave act. 7:30, the master plan steering committee will give us an update on the town master plan. 8 o'clock, joint meeting with the finance committee, always a fun time. And looking forward to that. 9 o'clock, town administrators report. 9:15, liaison reports. 9:25, approval of minutes and warrants. And the 9:30 executive session, which was originally sent with the agenda, is being postponed till March 9th at the request of the individual who we were going to meet about. So we will be adjourning earlier than the 10 p.m. hopefully, that is on the original agenda. So let me first ask, is there any community input? Hearing none, we'll move right along to the LEPC report. The LEPC has been almost completely consumed with the vaccine issue. And as most of you know, Carlisle has been denied any vaccines. We have been ready to go for about a month now. We got our structure up in the Congregational Church parking lot, and thanks to the Congregational Church for providing that to us. That was put up in 2 days with help of our firefighters and EMTs and Chief Sorrow's crew, who worked just incredibly hard during some pretty crappy weather to get that thing up and running. But we have been notified by the state that individual towns will not be given vaccine. We have to either be regionalized or use the mega sites that have been set up around the state with minimum allocations of about 750 doses a week. We've applied for 100 doses a week, and that has not met with much joy at the state level. We're going to keep applying for 100 doses a week. We have sent a letter of intent to the state with several other towns in the area to establish a regional vaccination site or sites, which would perhaps meet the minimum number of shots that the state requires. We have not actually applied for that. This is simply a letter of intent. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered, whether or not, what kind of obligations we're entering into if we do that. And so that was just sent in today, and we will be waiting to hear from the state near the end of the week on whether or not we'll move forward with the regional approach to vaccinations. We still feel very strongly that Carlisle has taken all the steps necessary to meet the needs of our town people. We have an outstanding plan in place, including the names, addresses, emails of our most vulnerable, including the aged. And we are ready to go if and when we ever get any vaccine. And we want the town to know that we are ready to do that. And that includes going house to house if we have to deliver vaccines to people who are homebound. But for now, we have not been given approval to do that by the state, but we're going to keep trying. In the meantime, we are monitoring the local, the more local regional sites like Lowell, Natick, Needham, and as slots become available there, the Council on Aging has been making phone calls, helping people make appointments, and we have about 100 seniors over the age of 75 who already have appointments, or have either gotten vaccines or have appointments in the near future, and that includes now down to 65. One of the issues we have is that while we, long before we got all our 75 and up vaccinated, they lowered the age, putting a tremendous amount of competition for the available slots. And that's been a real problem. But we'll deal with what we're dealt, and it's just very frustrating for us. But I want everybody to know that both the Board of Health, the vaccine subcommittee of the Board of Health, and the LEPC are working fervently to get our residents vaccinated, and we will continue to do that until we actually accomplish the goal. And that's really all I have for the LEPC at the moment. But it's been a challenging and very, very frustrating time for the last 2 months. We've put a huge amount of time and effort, and as you know, expense by buying the structures for the town, and it's been just given us no relief at all for at the moment. So we're going to keep going, and we'll try. We'll see what we can do. Any questions from anybody on the LEPC? Hearing none, let's move on to the Gleason Library trustees and the PFMLA. Is somebody going to present on that?
Yeah,
Karen.
Karen, all right.
Yeah.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I don't have a material to present. This is just reaching back to you guys. A while ago, several meetings ago, we brought up the point of having the employees from Gleason Public Library being covered with something by the PFMLA or similar maternity leave benefits. Since then, I believe the issue was passed to the, looking here, the Insurance Advisory Committee. And I believe it hasn't really been discussed, but Tim asked me to look around and see if other communities were using PFMLA for the town employees, for the librarians. We asked around, and that doesn't seem to be the case. The librarians also do not seem to be covered by PFMLA. However, we feel, the trustees feel that this is a good opportunity for Carlisle to be in the forefront of doing something like this. Just to remind everybody, currently Carlisle employees who work over 20 hours per week receive 12 days of sick leave per year. So you could bank up to 120 days or 24 weeks if you don't use any of your sick days, and you could use them for maternity leave. It would take a minimum of 5 years of saving up sick leave to cover one paid 12-week leave. And there are no, that we know of, there are no currently like pregnant librarians or anybody who needs this benefit at this exact moment. But we think that given COVID-19 and potential other pandemics in the future, we don't think it is right to try to save up on sick leave to save for maternity leave, especially if you are considering having more than one child. Then you would have to, save for many years. Like if you have a cold, still go to work so that you could use that time for a maternity leave later on. So this is our point. This is what we wanted to bring up to the board of select, to the select board. And I'm open for questions or opinions that you may have in the topic.
Obviously, if we did it with for the librarians, we would probably need to do it for the rest of the town as well.
Correct.
But how many library staff are there? What just with regard to that particular group? Do you know how many people would have to be covered?
So we have both full-time and part-time staff. Full-time, we're talking about, I believe it's 4 full-time, and then there are some part-time staff. PFMLA covers both.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I don't have the exact number of employees off the top of my head.
Okay, it's probably not critical, because again, I think if we did it, we'd have to do it for the whole town.
Correct.
And I know the Insurance Advisory Committee is going to be meeting in the next couple of weeks because of the change in, as you may know, we changed the healthcare coverage for
Yeah.
all town employees. And so I know they're going to be meeting. And as far as I know, this has not been discussed by them yet, but certainly will be on the agenda of our next meeting. I sit on that advisory group, so I'll make sure it's on the agenda.
Excellent. Yeah, this is how because it had been brought up several months ago, we just wanted to make sure it doesn't get lost in the shuffle and it gets discussed in the insurance meeting.
Understand. Yep.
Okay.
Good.
That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for bringing it up. That's nice to know the board is concerned about their employees.
Yes, absolutely.
David.
Yeah, just one comment, and I was looking for the reference and I can't find it, but we sort of covered this with the teachers in the summer when we were considering going back to school. And I can't find the exact reference, but as you mentioned, Alan, we have to be consistent. So I would start with the guidance that the school, which is by far the largest employer, has decided upon. Let's make sure we don't reinvent the wheel on that.
Yeah, it is my understanding that this teachers union have their own maternity leave negotiation.
Well, that may be true, Karen, but what we generally try to do is get parity between the benefits offered contractually, bargaining unit employees and independent employees. We try not to have too much in between.
That would be fantastic if the other town employees, including the librarians, could be under the same.
Well, I'm not saying I'm not saying they're under the same exact, but as each specific thing we look at and we try to get parity. That's my
yes,
opinion.
appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Thank you, Karen. Appreciate you coming tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you. Well, we're again a little ahead of schedule. Is the master plan committee ready to go on this, or should we wait?
No, we're here.
I see Jack's here.
So Jack and I will be.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and hear from you? Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to kick off, and then Jack will pick up partway through. I'm going to share a very short slide deck just to kind of help guide the visuals of the conversation. So as we thought about what was most important for you to hear about, what we thought we would focus on is just getting you all up to speed on where we are in the process. And I know there are some specific questions that you have, but we thought we'd just ground that and just where the whole process is. So let me just start with maybe a refresher for most of you, just on the composition of the steering committee, which has shifted somewhat since Civic Moxie's departure. We had been sort of a typical steering committee while Civic Moxie, was working with us, sort of more oversight direction. What we have shifted to is much more of a working committee where everyone on the steering committee sort of has a substantive job to do. So what you are seeing on the screen is our org chart of sorts of how we have reorganized ourselves. So within the steering committee itself, so Jack sits in this chair position for better and for worse as he's learning, as he really settles into his role. So Jack is, he plays a really important role, sort of helping us communicate out with all, with all the liaisons, boards, individuals from different boards in town. Of course, the planning board is who has been sort of reviewing our budgets and sort of approving and making sure that what we're doing is sort of on target. And so Jack serves as our chair. I serve in this master plan elements leader role, essentially helping coordinate other individuals who are taking on very specific tasks, specifically spearheading some of the thinking and work around land use, facilities, housing, sustainability, and so on. I won't go in detail through every role on this sheet, but then we also have an engagement leader who is heading up what does the public participation look like from this point on. Now, as I'm sure you all know, Barney and Kate sit within this structure and organization. They're contributing directly to our efforts. We are in the midst, by the way, I'll just point out this pink planner project manager role. This is the one hire that we are soliciting for right now. And I think that closes soon. And so we'll be vetting applications. We thought it was important that we have someone with some planning background who can really kind of quarterback this team of volunteers to help us get us to the finish line. Should I go through the whole thing and then take questions, or is it better to field questions now?
I think probably go ahead and do your whole
Do
presentation. Yep.
do the thing. Okay.
Yep.
So, all right. So that's the current structure. We're very much a working board. What you are seeing now on this screen is this is representative of the timeline we think we are on. Please don't take it as the definitive word, because once we hire a planner project manager, I think they're going to have to look again at our timeline. But what this tries to show is sort of from the very beginning, sort of where are we in the process? So going way back to September 2019, Civic Moxie came on board, and they started and led a lot of work in the data gathering phase, which wound up taking much more time and resource than they thought it would. That's part of the whole story with them. But that's this light green area up here. They got a lot of it done. We're still doing a bit of that just to wrap up some of those, some of their work there. But that's this top line. Civic Moxie was able to begin doing some analytical work, pulling together what have we learned from the community about challenges and opportunities, and what is their perspective on what we could be thinking about. That's this analysis piece. And we had done quite a number of public participation events and activities during their tenure. That's a sort of orange thing. So when they quit in July, we have this gap where as a steering committee, we had to reformulate and figure out what do we do going forward. So that's what these dashed lines are. We did keep meeting through that period as we were just trying to figure out what happens now. And what we came up with and what the planning board is supporting is sort of the timeline that you see now. We have envisioned completing a master plan by the end of 2021. Now, this was a timeline we put forward in October as we reformulated, got the working board in order, and we put forward to planning board. This is what we think it takes to get done in a timely way. We need to wrap up a bit of the data gathering. We really need to dive into the analysis, pick up where Civic Moxie left off. And then of course, what we need to do is really start developing what we're calling concepts. Sort of how do we think across, what kinds of directions might we put forward to get input from the town on what we might do across all the different topic issues in an integrated way. And so that is sort of represented in this light gray. We need to put a few basic concepts in front of the town, gauge input, really start to solidify a sense of priorities, what really matters to people, what do they want to see, are we getting strong reaction one direction or another. That will help us hone down into a draft single plan, that's this medium gray, that we would then solidify into a final plan. Throughout, of course, we would have a bunch of communication and outreach events to ensure we're getting public participation in a robust way. And we would, of course, meet all along the way. Now, so this was the timeline as of October that we thought was feasible. As we look at, well, where are we? Are we on track? I think we would say we're maybe a little bit behind at this point, a couple months worth, probably behind where we thought we were going to be. I think startup has taken a little longer than we anticipated. But we are really starting to dig into the analysis piece, and we hope to be developing concepts in the next, 6 weeks-ish or so. So that's kind of timeline-wise where we are in the process. In terms of recent activities, what we have been up to. So we have submitted a raft of existing conditions reports to the planning board. There are 9 in total, 7 of them are complete and have been submitted. There are 2 that need a bit of updates. We're waiting for some inputs on those, but those are substantially complete. We are currently fielding, soliciting applications for the planner project manager candidate role. February 8th, the planning board approved the budget that we had set aside for GIS mapping. And so we are getting on board the people that will help us with the GIS, that will help us with analysis and option development. We are working within the existing budget constraints that we have. So the original budget amount that was approved at town meeting. We're working within those numbers throughout. And finally, the engagement team led by Barney has developed an overall plan and a set of ideas for public re-engagement, some really innovative stuff given COVID. Just how do we get people re-engaged in what we're doing? So there's a long list of suggestions and ideas that they've put forward that we're going to be playing with and using. And one of the things that they've already deployed is the first of a series of videos that they're pushing out on various platforms and social media just to get people re-engaged, because it has been almost a year since we've done significant public input events. So that's where we are in terms of recent activities. And then Jack, you want to pick up from here?
Yeah, so Stacy mentioned some other analysis work that's been ongoing. So part of what Civic Moxie produced as part of their work was to develop some build out options. And we've been working with a review of some of those. We have some concerns about how they develop those numbers. So we're trying to sort of evaluate it. It was more of a spreadsheet analysis than a visual analysis. And so we think that we have to merge those two. They did manage to produce a basic set of static maps that'll go into the report, the final report. And we probably have 12 or 13 maps that will be useful for those purposes. I think some of you may know that Carrie Kissinger and some of the people from the FinCom developed a financial model. And so we've been, we need to update it with a current set of data, but the model is there so that we can sort of plug and play different scenarios. Another thing that we've put together, again, with Carrie's sort of leading the charge, we have a benchmarking analysis of 7 different communities where we look at every almost financial data point. How do we compare to those communities? And then we also have sort of a qualitative outlay of recent, activities in those communities, whether it's master plan or other, zoning changes or other, housing, public housing, or, housing trust kinds of activities. And so we have that qualitative benchmarking too. So it's a fair amount of it. When I got involved, one of the things that I was impressed by is that even though Civic Moxie kind of left in the midst of this, they left with a combination of things that they produced and that the steering committee produced that puts us in a pretty good place moving forward. And the last thing is that they also developed a draft set of vision, values, and some metrics, to measure up against those. So in terms of elements, as Stacy alluded to, so we have captains focused on these key areas, housing, which is area that Kate has been working with, facilities, John Ballantyne, sustainability, Bob Zog, also on transportation and open space. And we were waiting for the open space report, which is now, I'm sure many of you know, is available in draft. So that was a major addition to a resource that we were looking forward to receiving. So, but just to reiterate a point that Stacy made while we're looking at this, each of these captains has developed any number of structures to get input from the community, whether they've been holding, formal task force meetings, as John has been doing, or more informal discussions with experts. And the goal is to combine this information and run it through to develop the options. So that is, a work in progress. Stacy mentioned the selection of the project manager planner. Actually, Tim's aware of this. The closing of the posting, technical closing, was on Friday. And we did receive a couple of resumes and proposals. So there is a selection committee that needs to convene, talk about those two. It was two specifically proposals that we received, and make a determination, do we go forward, conduct interviews with these two? Do we extend the date and solicit more proposals? I'm sort of a mindset that, we probably should at least have a conversation among the selection committee soon. And I'm sure Tim would probably agree with that. In terms of the captains, as I said, they are collaborating on these options. The goal is to try to express these different scenarios, both numerically, which I feel like we have some pretty good data tables, but also visually, which is why the GIS maps that we're building are really important to this shared, exchange of what does this look like, and then how we communicate with the, back into the phase with communicating with the community will be equally important with those visuals. So I guess we mentioned the re-engagement activities continuing. I think the big next step from the engagement will be the townwide survey, which is and always has been contemplated as the major re-engagement activity with the town. And we're still a little ways off on that because we want to be careful to ask the questions that are representative of the context that we've been developing. So it's a lot to throw at you. We'll step back and take your questions at this point.
Thank you both. Very useful. Questions from the board? Well, I'll start.
Yeah, you go ahead. You go ahead.
All right. In terms of the townwide survey, is that going to be a remote survey? Are you looking more to doing something like the initial meetings we had at the school and the kitchen, what they call the kitchen cabinet?
In conversations.
Kitchen
kitchen conversations. What have you envisioned what format that will take at this point?
Well, so we're still, that's been one of the things that we want to make sure we get right, because, clearly the loss of the consultant, had an effect on this, but we can't minimize the effect that COVID had on this whole process too, and maybe had on the consultant. But what I'll do is just maybe turn it out. Barney, are you comfortable talking a little bit about this? Because Barney has really done a lot of work on this particular topic, and I'd rather invite her to step in and share some of her thoughts.
Sure, happy to do that. So the current thinking is that we are probably unlikely to be able to hold large public meetings, indoors anywhere, as we did early on in the process for the master plan. So we have a number of alternatives. In terms of the survey, what we're thinking is that we are going to do that as primarily an online survey. And we've are very fortunate to have the contribution of Lynn Lipinski, who is making her company available to provide as a contribution to this, to developing the plan. Her company does marketing, online marketing, and we would work out the survey. We would determine the content, and her company would help us determine the sort of best way to ask the questions to elicit data that will be useful in terms of analysis. And we would put that out through social media, but also in all likelihood, we will have a paper survey as well, because we know that there are people in town that will not either be able to or feel comfortable completing a survey on their laptop or whatever electronic device they're using. So that's a current thinking. As Jack said, we know this is two things, are critical there. One is the content. And so we need to make sure the issue captains have gotten far enough along in their analysis so that we can be asking meaningful questions. And then secondly is what the project manager planners, their view of what's the best way to do this, because we're assuming they'll have experience in this kind of thing. So in addition to the online survey, I will say that we are also going to re-engage with those that hosted the kitchen conversations and see if we can also expand those hosts and do something that we haven't settled on a single name, but it's something that would be kind of a COVID safe way of having small groups just getting together to discuss specifics about the master plan. And it could be driveway dialogues or trail talks or cyber chats, but basically having those small group conversations is another engagement tool that we're planning to ramp back up.
And I just
and I would
add,
Stacy, or I just want to jump in with one other thing. There was a pretty comprehensive survey done, I think about 10 years ago. And so we've been paying careful attention to that. But one thing we're trying to do differently is that was a household oriented survey.
Mhm.
And we don't want to assume that every household thinks the same way. And so we would like to really drive this as a resident response. And one of the reasons that we were pushing the social media channel as well is we want to make sure I think what we concluded from the kitchen conversations is there's a segment of the population that's actively engaged. They tend to be people who have more time on their hands. We really want to connect with the elements of the population that are pressed for time, get them, engaged in the survey and engaged in the process. So that's why social media and some of the marketing expertise that we're getting that Barney mentioned is very valuable. Stacy, I'm sorry to jump in ahead of you.
no, not at all. I guess the only thing I would add is that I think we see the survey as the best way to get as broad a reach as possible, right? We want to extend the conversation beyond kind of the usual people that like to participate in these conversations. And so the survey is probably the best way to do that. But I would offer up that it's not in isolation, right? Barney talked about all these other kinds of events. And I think really development of a master plan is best done in dialogue rather than in a static one way, pick a box, yes, no, not as much nuance, not a back and forth. So I think we see it as one part of a more robust, even given COVID, we still can do some things. So.
Yep.
Other questions? Okay, back to me again. One of the elements of the master plan, in the early stages, it really was asking, what would you like the town to look like in the future? What don't we have that you'd like to see here? Obviously a community center, an MBTA station, an indoor skating rink. The missing part of all that, of course, were the resources necessary to accomplish any of that. And the question that I have is, to what degree is the master plan going to take on that admittedly very difficult component of what are the, given the resources of the town, what sorts of things can we accomplish, or what would we have to do to change the resources of the town to allow us to do things that people really want to see done?
Well, that's a great question, Alan. One of the community values that's in the draft statement is fiscal sustainability. So, the idea of having a framework that works for both long-term and short-term fiscal needs is, fundamental to the analysis. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, this sort of plug and play model. If we can update the assumptions in it and start to, ask those questions of if you wanted to build a community center, to use your example, and you wanted to plug that in as an expense, what would the tax side of the equation have to look like? And, or, is it realistic? And that's why we'll be looking at more than one scenario. There's sort of what I call the trending scenario, which is what Carlisle growth has looked like for the last 20 years, which is, as you all imagine, dynamically different than the way it looked in the preceding 20 years. And so, that's sort of one scenario. The consultants left us with a build out analysis, which, is again, on the other end of the extreme, perhaps really unrealistic. What does it look like if all the open land gets developed? And that's, not a likely scenario. But what we're going to do is try to measure against what those, let's call them wants are, desires or nice to haves, and see if they're realistic. Because if we don't push that back to the community, we'll get an overwhelming, I think, support for things that may not be realistic. So we have to be operating in a realistic framework.
But I would also say we're talking about orders of magnitude, right? That the master plan process wouldn't be able to get into, specific feasibility studies and that sort of thing. So I think we're all aware of that, right?
Yep.
But orders of magnitude, yes. Yeah.
So, right. So Stacy, I mean, that's the thing that's been troubling me for quite a while is you use the word process, and it's a very process-oriented process. It appears to me, right? We're going to do these studies, and we're going to study the study, and then we're going to plug in these things. And so has there been a step back? It's been quite a while, partly because of civic moxie, partly because of COVID. But, when I go back in my own mind to the kitchen table conversations, I personally got a lot out of the ones I went to because, well, first of all, I like engagement anyway, but I think it seemed to me like that was the right approach. In other words, a grassroots sort of reach out. Let's take the pulse of what people think are important. Let's discuss trades, and then let's get on with it, and that second part didn't happen. And so we're back to okay, what do we really want to be when we grow up? And I think I don't want to speak for the whole select board, so I'll just speak for myself. But what I find frustrating is we're so involved in the process. And it seems to me like we could just do that, or even just take the one we'd already done, make some general decisions about priorities of people, and then move exactly to where Alan wants to go, because we are resource constrained. There are constraints, right? So, I mean, if, again, from a modeling standpoint, you know what you want to, you know the things you could possibly do, and then you have to put a set of constraints on those. Financial, obviously, environmental, water, whatever, right? And I guess I'm just frustrated that we're not already, that we just didn't finish that first piece. We already know the constraints. We don't really need to ask people. We kind of know those. And then let's move into this, you know, these trade-offs and this rank order prioritization, because at the end of the day, what's actionable, what's useful to the select board and the finance committee is, I would think, is a benchmark of what other people think, what the town constituents feel is both of important, well, is important within the constraints of this town, as a guide for us to make our decisions. So what's happening instead is we're now sort of confronted, if you will, with the need to make a decision on the public safety building. What I was worried is sort of happening in my mind. We already know we have to build a public safety building. We are now beginning the process of figuring out how much that costs. And that's just going to kind of push to the right all these other things, because that's going to be the first project, without really the advantage, I guess, that we would have had about, you know, understanding what the constituents want.
Yeah.
And I mean,
David, I just want to say that, you know, to be clear, we are really into this second phase, and that all those kitchen conversations and all of the initial inputs were collated and put into these existing conditions reports. So we have a pretty good set of, call it, you know, inputs from the community that we're using as part of this process. And the people who, you know, organized and collated all that information, Barney and I think Madeline Blake and Jan, they did a lot of work to, you know, try to get a cohesive, you know, set of baseline goals that the community had. So we're working off that. I want to be clear that we're not, you know, so for example, the whole notion of the community center, the initial read that came out of the kitchen conversations and the community outreach, the first phase was pretty lukewarm on the community center. So, you know, but I don't want to necessarily say the community center, based on that first part, is dead in the water. So we have to take that input that we got first and now move through, you know, a combination of sharing both, you know, numeric table kinds of information about these fiscal constraints and some visual looks at, you know, what Carlisle could look like, and then get that second layer of information, because that's the way the process was supposed to and is, you know, planned to go forward. So it's a two-step public engagement. It's actually a three-step.
What's the goal here? What's the end deliverable that you guys are working toward?
It's a report.
It's a master plan document that
That
sets
says
out
what?
a set of
That says
talks
should do. Go ahead, sorry.
that so it basically should at that point be a representation of, all right, we think there's broad community support for these are the set of priorities that really matter to the town, that they would want to see the town pursue, some of which will have big, you know, dollars attached to them. I think those are the things you're concerned about. Others of which might not have big dollars attached to them, but would represent, you know, does the town want to see, you know, changes in land use patterns, or does the town want it, you know, or maybe the town doesn't want to see changes. What is, you know, cultural and historical resources? What does the town want to see? Those may not come with big price tags, but there might be specific initiatives that, or with sustainability,
Yeah,
that would also
connectivity
be
and sustainability are
connectivity,
two
right?
large issues that are in the community values. But, just to read from the text, it's a plan is a statement through text, maps, illustrations, and other forms of communication designed to provide a basis for making long-term physical development of the municipality. And, that's what the plan is intended to create. And, I feel like we have quite a bit of information to put in there, but we don't have that second engagement. And in particular, I don't know, I think we had, Barney, you may know, or Stacy, but the kitchen conversations was it 400 people total?
Or 60, I believe.
Or 60. We would really like to see, 460 to us doesn't feel like enough of a, connection with the community. And so just to try to run off of the 460 very good inputs, doesn't feel like it's sufficient for the ultimate plan.
It's still pretty good, actually. For a small town, that's almost 10% of the people. But I don't know. You guys know more about how you should run these things. I'm kind of wondering why we can't speed up this thing to get a pretty good answer. You get a pretty good answer to give us some guideposts, and you can keep refining it. But
Yeah.
I feel like life's going on. The select board and the FinCom have to make decisions, every day and every year.
Yeah.
And
Which I think is inevitable, right? I mean, if the town needs
of course, but we were hoping, I guess I was hoping for more, help there.
I hear you on that, David. I think in some ways the steering committee really feels like now we can like strap on the engines and really go. I mean, there has been a bunch of process things that we've been sorting out with planning board since October that really have meant we're not quite poised yet to totally dive into all the analysis we want to do. But I think we feel like we've gotten now the decisions made and we're really poised to do that, David, which I think means, it does mean you are going to see more activity and more progress now than you have seen really since March from this group. I think it doesn't line up with the kinds of decisions you need to make in the short run, which is unfortunate.
So is it end of year? You initially, Stacy said end of year, and then you kind of backed away. Is it?
I know.
End of the year.
So we may need to back away from that. I mean, just given where we are right now, we're a couple of months behind where we wanted to be. I mean, maybe we can make up some of that time. The place where we would be concerned about making up that time is shortchanging the public input portion. In fact, before Civic Moxie quit, they were trying to revise timelines and they put sort of a revised timeline in front of us that squeezed the public input so much that we thought that would really actually undermine the whole effort, that the community would feel railroaded and that they hadn't gotten a very adequate, say in what the plan was. And we were pushing back on Civic Moxie. And then,
Well, and I would just give you this, my perspective here. The end of the year is significant because in an ordinary year, and this year is late, and last year was late because of COVID, but in an ordinary town year, the beginning of the following year, that is now at this point, the beginning of 2022, is the run up to town meeting of spring 2022, and we begin to make decisions. These are big decisions. So, again, from my parochial perspective here, we kind of band-aided the budget for this year because we didn't know what to expect. So we kind of said nothing. We said no to we basically pushed everybody off on any kind of capital. And we're doing a modest version of that again this year. But really that pressure to do things, public safety being one of them, infrastructural things, you know, there's a bunch of things that are kind of pressing at the door, and they've been 2 years building up this pressure. So I really feel like not this time, maybe even 10 months from now or 11 months from now, we are really going to be sitting as a select board and a FinCom saying, we got to decide some things. We got to decide how much money we can spend on these things. What are the priorities? Are we going to pull the trigger on, you know, a building and da, 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 da. So having your piece fit into that, not late, is really important. So if there's any message I can deliver, it's like, try to get it done by the end of the year, get it rolled out so that it comes right into the time when we're evaluating this wish list that comes up every year. That would really help us. And if we don't have it, we move on, and then you're one more year, and now you're really 3 years into your first 10 years anyway. You're already kind of out of it. So that's really my advice.
I hear that.
David, no, we appreciate that. We're very conscious of that. And, you know, the latest communications rollout was very focused on, you know, the process for the town meeting 2022, as Barney will support me on. So I think the critical thing here is, you know, how and what we can get out in front of the community in terms of this survey ahead of the summer, because COVID or no COVID, the summer still represents kind of a break point in terms of how effectively, you know, you can communicate. And so we are, you know, really trying to see what we can get in this spring time frame to put out to the community, so that, because we know we're going to lose a window come August and September. Just naturally going to happen, whether people are taking their vacation at home or not. So we're sensitive to that. We're sensitive to what you're saying. And as Stacy said, I think we're really trying to push forward now. We think we have the tools we need to get it done.
Thank you.
Let me go one back to process for a little bit, because I hate to do that. Have you considered how you will address the inherent conflicts that are going to occur? When you know, what I hear in town meeting is when I see people say, you know, what should our town look like? Oh, well, we should have cows and horses grazing in the town center with all the amenities of Brookline. And have you thought about how? And that's easy to say. You know, that's we want Carlisle to remain rustic and rural, but we want public transportation. We want you know, affordable housing. We want blah blah. You know the list better than I do. Have you thought about in the report how you will, or if you will, address those inherent conflicts that will probably come out of any wish list that the public comes up with?
You want me to?
Go ahead.
I'll say, and then Jack can give the better answer. So Alan, I think, so the short answer is yes, in that we want to put those choices clearly in front of the town and get a clearer sense of how the priorities are falling out. And so part of what we think will help us do that is if we generate a few different scenarios that create some contrast. Well, it could look like this. It could look like this. Well, we could do that. And we put a few different versions out that people can then react to. And we do that visually, not just like a table and numerics. So that people start to get a handle on, well, so what would the feel of the town be if we went in this direction or that direction? Then we, in my own experience, that generates better feedback, because people often, when they're reacting to something, you often get a clearer sense of how the priorities shake out. So we think at the end of the day, we hope to have created a conversation that has kind of forced to the surface some of those choices. Some of them may turn out to be false choices, or that actually we can do a little bit of both, or we, you know, it would be different than what you're imagining. And we want to make it as visual and clear and accurate as possible. to shape that conversation. It doesn't mean the contradictions will go away, but we hope it means that we get a clearer sense of direction and buy-in to make a particular set of trade-offs.
One thing I'll add to that is, in terms of your analogy about, horses grazing in the fields and Brookline amenities downtown, I can tell you that one of the pieces of work that came out of the original Civic Moxie study is, real limitations to commercial tax base based on, just the pure zoning dynamics of Carlisle. So, what it will be more like is, can you create some more commercial kinds of options? It's not going to become a major tax rateable. It's going to be more of a, how does this fit into the community fabric? Because again, this is where we do feel like we have some input as to, this whole question of what's realistic, what's feasible, and there is some good work on that.
But do you see the plan simply listing the options or a number of scenarios, or do you see the plan making a recommendation?
I think it's first putting options out. Gathering in another round of feedback. But now people are reacting not to general, what do you want the town to be, but now they're reacting to, what if it looked like this? What are the problems with that? What if it looked like that?
Mhm.
And then
But I
after
think
that
the
round,
final
we would
plan-
make a recommendation. The final plan would be the recommended plan.
Okay,
Exactly.
thank you. That's
Yeah.
that was a very important
That's
statement.
yeah.
And as I recall, and Alan, you said, what does it look like? And as I recall, the 1960 master plan of Carlisle planned a bypass through the center of town. So there you go.
The horses bypass for what?
Yeah.
For the horses going
A
into
highway
the
bypass, meaning that they were going to create a way that 225 became more of a thoroughfare.
Mm.
Needless to say, it was never
We cured that with the Rotary.
it was never acted on.
Yeah.
Right, the Rotary.
That's not on the short list. That's not something we're exploring.
So,
Okay. Other questions? If not, we're right on time. So I want to thank you very much. And I tell you, we very much appreciate the time and effort and work you're putting into this. And we're very much looking forward to both the coming months and the final report.
Yeah, let me put in one more pitch at the risk of delaying Chairman Lewis's schedule, which is generally very on target. So you mentioned, Jack, the summertime people go to sleep, and we know that. But it's a time when, at least I've found in my years of service to the town, that the boards can step back a little bit and do some reflection. And one of the things that I would like our board to do, this summer is more goal setting and long-term strategic thinking about where the town's going. So to the degree that you have some, early, I get the sense you kind of want to keep your process sort of contained and not really roll it out till it's all ready. But I'd like to put a bid in here for you to come back in a summertime session where really we just reflect on what you've learned, between now and then and where it's going, and give us let's have some open, dialogue about our own mullings about, the direction of the town and what the challenges are, because we, again, as I said, we wrestle with this all the time, right? Open space, affordable housing, new building, schools, we have all that stuff. And while I think the group, the crowdsourced opinion that you're pursuing is very important to us, we live it, and we would really like the chance to interchange with you midstream. So,
no, I think that's a great request, and something that Madeline Blake had suggested vis-a-vis the planning board was maybe even the possibility of a joint
Yeah.
kind of session focused on that specific topic, which I think was a great idea that she put forth. So
Well, Madeline's on the call. I'm happy to entertain a joint, meeting of that, because we don't, again, that's a time where we sort of kick back from our schedule, and we really would like to spend, couple quality hours just on one topic.
I just wanted to let you guys know that we're also interested in having a lot of updates and meetings with the master plan committee. But in order to reduce the necessity for a lot of presentations, we'd be happy to do joint meetings with you guys if that's an easier way to tackle this.
yeah, I think it's a great suggestion, Madeline, and David, a good suggestion on your part. So let's, we're going to see if we can plug these kinds of things back into our scheduling and planning. And, we'll look forward to coming back and giving you some food for thought.
Okay, and even if it's, if the COVID cooperates, we've done not just food for thought, but actual food.
That would be
We
nice.
have a meeting
Yep.
and we've done that, we bring a meal, we bring meals, and we enjoy it.
Maybe we'll get some vaccine. Who knows?
Let's have it out of, let's have it outside of town hall. So I'll bring a bottle of wine
There you go.
or two.
I don't think one bottle is sufficient.
Well, I have more. A bottle per person. How's that?
Good suggestion.
Thank you very much.
Right.
All right,
very
thank you
much.
all.
Thank you. Yep.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Our next is a joint meeting with the Finance Committee. Jim, do you want to call your meeting to order?
Yes, I do, Alan. We need to take attendance. I'd like to start with James,
Cataccio here.
Adar here,
Delia here.
Liang here.
Lipinski here.
we have two members probably not joining us, one for sure, and that Scott is on vacation with his family. And Melissa McMorrow is attending a regional school committee meeting tonight where they are talking about the fiscal 22 budget. So I think that qualifies as relevant.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, and I think I also like to recognize Kim Kane is on the call also this evening. So that's
Yes, he is.
an important resource. Yeah.
And as you know, we met last night to talk some more about fiscal 22. I'd like to begin by just reminding all of us a little bit about where we are and kind of how we got here in terms of fiscal 21. In June at that meeting, we approved a budget for fiscal 21 that was in fact flat. That is, everything was rolled over. Nothing was increased. In October at the special town meeting, we approved a budget whose bottom line was the same. But in reality, it was not the same by department. We, in fact, many departments, all departments were able to increase their budgets for COLA, for contracts, for increased hours as approved by the select board, and for several other kinds of requests that had been in the works. And we paid for those by taking advantage of a one-time significant reduction in our allocation for the high school based on population or on enrollment. And secondly, by significantly reducing the amount of money we contribute to OPEB. So we did those things. We also were able to pay for a number of capital items and for several $100,000 in facilities. So we got the same bottom line, but it really wouldn't be the case that when we look by department at 22 versus 21, that those numbers are flat to 20. They're really not. Many of those numbers are higher. And one of our challenges in thinking about 22 is we need to see whether we can kind of right the ship a little bit and put it on more of a normal track as we look ahead. In terms of revenue, the picture is pretty solid as we see it for 22. Property taxes are coming in at a good pace. As we all know, state aid appears to be even perhaps a little higher than current year. The only weak spot is new growth, but that also is weak in the current year. And it's nice to have it, but we don't rely upon it when we budget, or only in a small way. So as we look at how we're going to budget this year, we're trying to kind of find the right metric, the right context in which to look at this. Going back over the last 10 years, and then looking at the average property tax per year, I think it's kind of interesting. This year's a big anomaly. This is fiscal 21. The average tax bill went down. But over the last 10 years, of course, that's not true in any of those years. And if you average it over those years, you come up with something like 2.7 to 3% as the average increase in the average tax bill, which I think is a measure that many residents and many voters can relate to. If we look at the numbers that we received when we had our meetings with all the departments in late February, I think they were very constructive meetings and we got a lot out of it. If you were to take everything that was brought back to us, and it would depend a little bit on whether we might do some borrowing or not, those would total somewhere between 4 and 6%. So our starting point already is a challenge. We had asked departments to not do any increases. We would take care of COLA separately and to just, basically give us a flat budget. Some departments did, or they were creative in how they did it. I think the library was creative that way. The Council on Aging was as well. But other departments, maybe didn't read the letter. And so, we have to go back and work with some of those and talk in more detail about what they're asking for. Most prominently, I think, as the select board knows, it's the Carlisle School. Their increase that they're requesting would amount to 7.5%. And we approved last night sending a letter to the school committee in which essentially we reiterate what we said in December and ask that they take a fresh look at those numbers. We feel those aren't sustainable numbers, but we also would like them to be the ones to take a hard look at it and come back and meet with us. I think for fiscal 22 budget, that's our number one challenge. On the high school, we do expect that this year's, meaning 22, the number will be somewhat lower than 21, again, because of enrollment, but it won't be as big as it was for fiscal 21. We're meeting with them next Monday night. So we expect they're talking to their committee tonight. We expect to be given pretty firm numbers Monday night that we can work with and budget with.
Not to interrupt you, Jim, but the debt number I gave was firm, the 950,726. And Melissa had given you an estimate for 6.3 million. And her email just came through that the Carlisle share will be 6,272,580.
Yeah, she sent that to me also.
Yep. So they have that. So
we'll talk to them Monday. That hasn't been voted by the school committee.
That's a share of what, though? I missed that.
This will be our allocation of their budget. So
okay, not debt. It's the operating budget.
There's both. No, Kim mentioned both. There's the debt number and the operating number, both of which would be somewhat lower than the current year.
We know the debt projected out just depends on what the percentage.
Yeah, they're not really engaging in any new capital things, right?
Well, not that we know of. That was an open question the last time they met with the committee, and we don't think so, David, but they have, a pretty big fish to fry in Concord with their middle school project.
Right. Well, one would assume that, right?
Yes. So that's where we're headed. Last night, we decided that we would like to target for our committee March 22nd to come up with a final budget. You meet on March 23rd. We would hope that we could come back to you on the 23rd with what we would propose to be the budget for fiscal 22. We have a lot of work to do between now and then. As I said, we have to talk to some of these departments. There's some total unknowns. We're still waiting to get the tuition numbers for vocational students. We don't know what the number will be for blanket insurance, although, Tim believes it'll be an increase of between 7 and 15%. We're waiting on that number. And we have to make some decisions, of course, about warrants, especially related to facilities. the capital equipment items, the requests that we have, if we put facilities aside and we also factor out the initial presentation by the school, it's about 630,000 in requests, which is roughly twice what we quote normally do for capital. So we have to look at that and work on that. But at this point, we're engaged in all of this. We're meeting again Monday night. I think we can be on track to get to March 22nd with a budget. And once again, I think our main challenge will be to work with the school and see what we can do about the proposal they've given us. Now,
Can I just ask you about the capital?
yes,
So that's capital, not the municipal facilities,
No,
not maintenance,
just equipment,
just equipment.
right? So we're sort of separating equipment from,
That's what I thought. I just want to,
Yeah.
$600,000 worth of equipment. Wow.
Yeah. Well, those are requests,
Well, I understand. I just.
Well, we have one.
It's so much more than we've seen in the past. So I'm just wondering where the heck that came from. Yeah.
Well, one big item in that, Kate, is from Gary at the DPW, and it's what he calls a roll-off truck. And a roll-off truck is 200,000. He has two of them right now. They're both quite old. They're used virtually every day, and the oldest one is kind of on its last legs. So that's why that is in there, and that certainly boosts the starting point.
Okay, that makes me feel better still.
Those are, yeah, I mean, we have those, like fire trucks, right? They come periodically.
Right, and we know fire trucks will be coming before too many years also. Could I ask before just anybody on the select board comments, do any of the finance committee people want to comment on what I've said so far? Okay, but
I think you've summed it up, Jim. I think the bottom line is there's a couple of things that, and I know we discussed, that would be great for the select board to think about, at least from a support perspective, and that is just looking at these municipal spends are one thing, but also from an operating budget perspective, thinking about really pushing the point home of centralization and consolidation as best we can without sacrificing services. So just a commentary really is all I wanted to make.
But I'm not quite following you, Lynn, in terms of what message are you saying?
Meaning, as we're looking at this budget, I know that we're already looking at doing some centralization of some services, meaning certain services that are replicated across different departments.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So
okay.
kind of thinking in that mode is what I'm saying, and just being supportive of
Right.
that thought process.
Yeah.
we have, and we always talk about this every year, and it's always difficult. We have some requests for additional positions in the budget. The schools in their proposal have 5 additional positions. The Board of Health, I think because they've talked to you about it, have really want kind of 2 positions. The police chief is asking for another full-time officer. As a committee, we can make opinions about that, but it'd be interesting to get your sense of adding positions for fiscal 22 and what would be priorities for you in that way.
Are you asking us this question right now?
Well, not for a final answer, but just we're having kind of a conversation. I just want to get a sense.
Yeah.
I think, what stands out on that list, obviously, is a police officer. Far more expensive than everything else, actually, and those of you on the select board for a while have dealt with this a few years ago.
One of the things, though, that I do understand in it, there is a change in the state requirement for accreditation of the new police officers, and which is going to make it probably more problematic for part-time. But the question is, if he has a full-time, is he going to give you a couple of part-times back? you know, are they going to be, or, you know, can he convert
I've
one?
never noticed that, Kate.
Well, okay, well,
Yeah, but that's why the justification becomes very important, because I know he is very concerned about the effect of this new law on the ability to retain or hire any additional, if somebody leaves, getting someone to come in and be a part-timer. And I think that's probably, it certainly is part, at least what's in the back of his mind on this. And that if you're going to, that because of the accreditation, very difficult accreditation requirements of this, it almost doesn't pay to be a part-time police officer anymore. It certainly doesn't pay for the town to pay for it.
How
Well,
many
it
part-timers
goes-
do we have?
Pardon me?
This requirement goes into effect in July. I guess my reaction would be, you know, let's wait and see what happens.
Yep.
You know,
That may be.
nothing prevents us from dealing with this either during the year or fiscal 23, rather than preemptively assuming that we won't be able to get part-time officers.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jim, you know, that comment to me resonates with with your earlier one, and my own, you know, philosophy, which is the idea that, you know, there's this, and it's been going on forever, right? We have level service. We think about level service, which is still itself subject to interpretation. And one could say Chief Fisher could say, my idea of level service is making sure that you have level service no matter what the outcome of external conditions. So I need an extra person because I think some people might quit, and that will give you level service. Whereas, you know, we might say, no, you know, there might be a dip in the road, but if you then have an issue and we fix it, you got level service. And this goes to the school argument too. You know, we have scope creep imposed on us from the state. We have scope creep just from the general, you know, and this is a good thing in the kind of in a social way, greater recognition of kids with needs and how you educate them. And, you know, we have scope creep in that we have an aging population in Carlisle, and that older group needs more, you know. So I take your point completely. And I really feel like, as you know, these two committees, we ought to really be kind of the same mind about where we want to hold the line on. People will always, with good intention, everybody will come in and say, I need this extra thing because all these things have happened. And that's true, but you know, you die of 1,000 cuts. And so I agree. And I'd like us to have, you know, that commonality of, and if you're going to roll the budget out in a month from now, maybe now is the time to have that conversation.
Well, also, I think, David, I agree completely with what you said. If we think about that number I mentioned about the last 10 years of, you know, the average rate of growth and average property tax being between 2.7 and 3%, that gives us a perspective. And, you know, if we say, okay, well, we'd like to kind of be in that range.
Yeah.
Then you work backwards from that and
Right.
you say, well, then certain things we can do and certain things we can't do. It just sort of forces a decision on you. Whereas if we pull one decision out and we say, well, do we want the Board of Health nurse? Well, there's a strong case for that, but you know, how does it stack up against everything else?
Right.
Yep.
I have to, though, I do want to point out that we have had also an inflation rate of approximately 2% per year, you know, so it doesn't mean that we have really been growing our budget or maybe getting more services necessarily. I mean, that's maybe just what you need in order to have level
Well,
service.
there is, I mean, Kate, there's a thing in the packet, which maybe comes from Jim, I don't know. CPI is 1.2, 1.1 even.
That was for last year. I
Yeah,
don't know, but I'm just saying, in the past 10 years, I would say generally, we've had sort of an average of 2% probably of
yeah, no, that's right. But I mean, a big piece of that also is we pay, and we should pay our people, you know, what they deserve. But we've been giving that 2% in which, since we're 85% labor model, we've been giving that 2% to the workforce. So whether it's the national average, not the national average, we've sort of imposed that COLA on ourselves that we, you know, if it's expected that we're going to give a 2% increase, then the trades we make are more constrained than if we challenge that assumption. I guess let's put it that way.
Well, and I've always thought we need to look at COLA. I've never been a fan of COLA, where the high-paid people get big increases and the low-paid people get almost no increases. I'm a big fan, and when I had control over it, what I did was do away with percentage increases and give dollar amount increases, where the higher percentages went to lower paid workers rather than higher paid workers. And I don't know that there's a savings to be had there, but I think it's something we ought to look at.
Can we
it's a
look at
different
it in
approach.
time for the budgeting process?
Yeah, I was not actually referring to the COLA to COLA. I was referring to just generally inflation and our
No,
tax
I know
rate
you
going
weren't,
up
Kate, but I
2%.
think it's worth.
It's not out of line with inflation, that's all.
No, I understand, but I mean, the corollary point, which is what I was saying, is not what, I understand what you were saying. I'm saying, okay, so we are in an environment, let's just accept it on faith that it's a 2% COLA environment or a 2% inflation environment, let's just say. We then make a conscious decision to pay our labor force consistent with that general condition. And by doing that, and that's not made that a wrong decision, but by doing that, we are constraining ourselves in any other way, because since we're 80-something% labor, it soaks up our 2% and we're done. We're basically done. And that, again, may be the right decision, but it is at a cost of these other things that we can't do.
I agree, and I'm not going to argue with that either. Well, all I was trying to point out was that meant that we do not have a larger government now than we had 10 years ago, really, because of inflation.
Well, there's other things to consider here. I was talking about the average tax bill. Kim has put together numbers about the actual average increase in expenditures. Those have increased at a higher rate over that 10-year period. Now, some of that is for various reasons related to discontinuities in when we appropriate funds and when we spend them, but we spend free cash, for example, which doesn't get factored into the property tax. And so those numbers push closer to 4% average over the 10 years. But I'm just sensitive to trying to have a benchmark that the people who will come to town meeting and who pay their taxes can relate to in some way.
Yeah, I get all that too. But I also want to echo what Lynn was saying, and that I also I'm very anxious to support and cultivate, or whatever word you want to put, more centralized services. And of course, the elephant in the room, you were talking about, other positions and other departments, but select board or the town hall is also asking for a couple of positions. And they are, and David and I have talked to a couple of you about also different ways of allocating resources in the town hall more centrally again. People are not stuck in a certain department. We do it more by function than by department.
Yeah. But again, those, from a budget standpoint, you can reallocate what people do for two purposes. One is to make the whole system more efficient, and the other is to reduce the number of people you need. And if the former doesn't result in the latter, it doesn't have any effect on the budget.
I understand, but we're doing it hopefully so that the former will have an effect.
Yeah, well,
and you still get the same amount of work done
it may obviate the need for an increase. Yeah.
Yes, right.
Well, we know those conversations are going on, and to whatever extent that you pursue them, in the interest of efficiency, you'll have our support. So,
okay.
But it doesn't directly affect the numbers we're playing with right now.
Right. Well, I guess I'm trying to justify our ask here there.
But while that, Jim probably doesn't move the needle. First of all, it's a process that's of a longer time frame than the budget process in front of us. But the one thing that is in front of us, back to the earlier point, Jim, is how do you establish what the COLA will be? I mean, that's a big component of your growth, right? So what's the method by which you do that?
I don't think there is I mean, typically, you know what the usual process is, right? The personnel board comes back with a recommendation to you, and then you decide what it'll be.
Yeah.
I think, you know, our committee has not really ever grappled with what the optimum number should be. I know that the context for this often is to look at what the contracts that have been negotiated say, right? And there's a notion of, you know, equity there. And most of those are 2%. There's one, I think, one of the school contracts is 2.25% for next year. But, you know, that, and it seems like an easy decision in one sense, unless you sort of go back to Alan's point.
Alan, when is personnel board going to come back with a recommendation within this next couple, 3 weeks?
I'll toss that to Tim. Is the personnel board going to meet?
I have been encouraging them to meet. If they fail to meet or are unable to meet, you've empowered me to make the decision for them. So one way or another, we'll have a recommendation for you very shortly.
Good.
Yep.
So I have a question for the finance committee. So Jim, you're saying that if you put all the department requests together, it's somewhere between a 4 and 6% increase. But that from what you're saying, my understanding is that average is skewed because the school represents their budget alone is a 7.5% increase.
That's right. Yeah.
And I've forgotten what percentage their budget is of the total budget, but it's definitely the biggest part of it.
Yes,
Like
So
6%.
yeah, so if you if this would it bring things, if the school budget could be I mean, that's a big decrease to go from 7.5% down to a, you know, sort of how low do they have to go to get to where we think it would be a level? I mean, it would, you know, it would be within our 2.7 to 3% range.
Yeah,
Have you looked at that?
That's a long way to go, I'm afraid, Barney.
Yeah,
but, you know, the other things that I didn't really draw out too much. One are, you know, OPEB, where we cut it back drastically for this year. You know, I mentioned at the Fin team this morning, a brief discussion we had last night that you were present for, where we're trying to think of a standard to use for the future. And we're thinking about, should we align, basically amortize the OPEB the way we are amortizing the retirement debt. And that might put us at a number we don't know for sure, but around 400,000 a year, which is where we were in fiscal 20. But to bring it back up to that, you know, is adding over 300,000 to the budget. We have the $1.1 million request on facilities. When we all had this discussion about facilities at this time last year, pre-COVID, you know, our committee recommended a $500,000 number, which the select board agreed with, but then we couldn't do it. But, you know, I think there's also an argument to be made to say, you know, every year it should be that number. You know, it's not like every year you're trying to debate everything on the list, but just say, look, for the next foreseeable future, we're going to spend $500,000 for these projects, something like that. But we have to talk about that too, because whether it's $500,000 or $1 million makes a big difference in that 4 to 6%.
Right.
But one thing I would like to know too is clearly there's only a few weeks between now and the 22nd, and we hope we will continue to communicate with the select board as we come to think of certain things that we believe should be recommended, so we don't get off track with you or vice versa.
Yeah. Is it, you know, I like seeing sort of the hard numbers in front of me. The department requests that you received, is it possible to, or when do you think you'll have some kind of a draft that we could start looking at, just to understand more about some of the choices that we
Yeah,
need to make?
I think I could forward to you the budget sheet we're working with now. It's just very rough, but I can do that. I expect by next Monday to be much clearer. You know, a few of the departments we do need to go back and talk to that have asked for big percentage increases are the CONSCOM, the Board of Health. You know, in the bottom line, they're not huge, but they are, you know, significant percentage increase. Of course, things like police or dispatchers with contracts, you know, those push upwards, but we're not going to be able to change those.
Right.
Putting aside the extra officer. But those other two departments are ones we need to review it with. But, you know, we can send that to you. I just don't want to get too far out in front of some of the discussions we've been able to have, you know.
Well, if I'm comfortable waiting till after your meeting this coming Monday,
Okay.
unless
We'll try
there's
to-
a select board want to see something sooner, but that's fine with me.
We'll try to clean it up by then. And I think you've heard tonight all the topics that we're talking about. You know.
Yeah.
For the school increases of 5 positions, are those COVID related? I mean, it's not, I take it as not, you know, attendance or whatever. Yeah.
No, actually, they expect the total enrollment to be pretty flat. Actually identical with fiscal 20 and a little bit higher than fiscal 21. They describe their budget as a post-COVID budget. So they're assuming that come September, everything will be back to normal. And that's the premise of the budget. So these positions were, some of which are paraprofessionals, were really driven largely by special needs and by their desire to serve kids more in the building rather than out of the building. But, you know, it's a significant number.
Right, I mean,
One of
right,
them is
to- on that
another-
point.
Yeah.
Kate, I think Kate asked the question. There's a couple children with a certain type of disability where the make-buy decision would favor building that capacity in-house rather than go out of district. If those positions are not filled, it's likely that there'll be, say, 2 additional out of districts. So the total dollars would presumably be more, but certainly not less. So it's a little bit, you know, you have to be careful with these budgets, how you cut it. If we're looking purely through the lens of headcount, it looks like an increase. But if you look at it through the total operating cost, it shouldn't be an increase. And they should explain that better than I can. But that's, you know, that we are at the, because we're such a small system, a few students move the needle on those expenses.
Well, their budget has different components. That's one. You know, of course, the teacher contracts and related contracts is another component. There's 80,000 that used to be in, you know, capital and is for IT that is now, we've asked them to put it back into their budget. Remember that they were able to pre-fund for fiscal 21 more than usual because of underspending in fiscal 20. But it also means that in their fiscal 21 budget, they have nothing for pre-funding for fiscal 22. So you might say there's another, you know, line item, and maybe we all would be happier if they didn't do pre-funding. You know, if we,
Well, right. I mean, I mentioned which meeting it was, but I mentioned the end of pre-funding, and a certain member of your finance committee who's not here, will remain nameless, told me not the end of pre-funding, but in fact, it's the
I'm
president.
here, Dave.
Oh, not that fun. But it is the end of
I
pre-funding. for
think it
this
takes away a tool in the, I think, Dave, I think it takes away a tool in the toolbox. I think it's it doesn't solve the underlying issue that people are trying to get at, and it,
No,
and
but
it
right,
takes
and I
away.
agree. I agree with that.
a lever.
I think the point is that, as Jim said, in the 1 year lens of 7% or whatever, that's like half of it, right? That elimination of this year's pre-fund, let's not go beyond this year, is a 3% swing for the reasons Jim mentioned.
Yeah, so we need to talk with them again, and we're hopeful that when they look at the letter, they'll take a fresh look at these numbers, and we would like to see it reduced a bit, but we don't expect that it will come down, that it'll be cut down to 2% or even 3%. Yeah.
And I actually happen to be in favor of having LEAs, local educational opportunities for kids, so that they're not bused out from here to Timbuktu. And it generally is cost effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the high school, I think, has been making progress on that subject as well in the last couple of years. Oh, Gesundheit. Do we, if we don't have more questions right now about fiscal 22, do we want to talk a little bit about debt?
Yes.
Yes. Kim is smiling.
I'm gonna let Jim take it. I'll back him on what he needs.
Well, I know Kim has gotten from bond counsel some various scenarios. Let me just start by saying, I really don't think debt capacity is the right term.
Yeah.
I think it's debt appetite. And, Kim has shared the statutory ceiling that we have, which is 5% of the total assessed valuation of the town. Well, that's way more debt than what we have now. And, like we could build a shopping center, but that it's really not our ability to borrow. It's what is the town's willingness to spend and pay for that's at issue here. And if you look at those scenarios, just one of them as an example, you look at the $10 million over 25 years, you see that the annual cost of that for between 5 and 10 years would double our rate of growth in the budget. The 2.7 to 3% would become, 5.25 to 6% for a number of years. So, and that may be well worth it, but it's really about the desire, the commitment to do it, and the reason for doing it. I think less about a concern at this stage about our bond rating or our real capacity to borrow.
Well
Yeah,
put.
I think what we're looking for is we see some, well, as you know, we have the maintenance of our facilities, but we also see on the horizon some pressure for some large projects. And so we need some sort of a yardstick to measure some of these options, would it have been better, or would it be better to put, even though it's a lousy little building, we hesitated to put the 890,000 some odd into the police department. And then of course it was even more, and then we stopped. And with that, are we going to then have since we didn't do that, do we have the appetite now to look at a $12 million building?
Right.
Or should we revisit this other little building and put the $1 million in it, and we have no yardstick to measure these projects with right now.
Well, we're going to do some more work. Kim and I have talked about having a conversation with a rating agency to try to feel them out a little bit of the way they look at this. I tried to do, I know Alan and Tim, I don't know who else, looked at that state website that has data on all towns of various kinds, average tax rates and, average indebtedness per capita. Unfortunately, our number's not in there, but I spent a few hours on that over the weekend, and what you see is everything, but the one pattern I could come up with is that the wealthiest towns, i.e. the Westons, have the highest debt per capita and the highest average property tax. So, maybe you can think, well, of course they do, because they don't care, a lot of the towns around us, I think our debt per capita is probably about $2,000 if it's 1.3 million right now. I'm sorry, 13 million rather.
Yeah,
Ken.
it went from 11 to 13, and it basically went from about 3% of your expenditure budget to it'll go around 4%. And if you add the high school on, which you have to 2, you're around 6%. So the question I was telling Jim with bond council is, you know, setting up more of like a policy that we stay between, you know, 10 and 12%, you know, finding out what that number is, which would still give you room to borrow. So these other towns, you know, sometimes if you don't have enough debt, that can work against you too. But sometimes it does, because then if you're not maintaining your buildings, they look at that too. So when they have their questions, when you go into them, but you have the ability, it's just what you look out at the 10-year plan to see what Erin's shaking her head.
Yeah.
I need a plan before you need to, you know, of what you want to do.
Yeah, I looked up what Moody's said about Carlisle today. And one of the drivers was if we increased our debt, then they would consider a downgrade.
Well, if you increase it by 50 million, yes, it could go down opposed to.
Yeah, they put the factors in on what would give us a positive rating increase. I think Jim really hit the nail correctly on, we definitely by statute have capacity to borrow. But you know, if you borrow for a $10 million building, you've basically used up your entire COLA or whatever you want to, you know, you can't really increase anything else.
Well, some of this kind of discussion took place, I think, however many years ago when the schools were being built. And, you know, I think that, you know, that took a big bite out of the budget. We were able to offset some of that for several years with free cash. But I believe also, I mean, I wasn't on the finance committee then, but I think there was a lot of discussion in the community and people essentially agreed that those were important projects to happen and were willing to accept the price that went with it. And so when we get to another stage, you know, not minor borrowings, but, you know, if we get to a big one, it needs to have real community support, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So that fits perfectly with, I don't know if you were on for the master planning discussion.
I was listening, David. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's exactly my point to them is, you know, we need some guidance from you on the crowdsourcing aspect because, and I think the people in this room, you know, in this audience understand this, but I don't know that it's widely understood that exactly what Erin just said. We kind of have one shot. We have one capital project at a time. The schools, it was a perfect storm at that time, what you mentioned, that both a high school and a grade school needed to have buildings. That to me was an artifact of poor infrastructural decisions made in the 60s when we were going to those schools, or some of us weren't even born yet, but I was going to those schools. And, you know, okay, so fine. So we understood that was a weird confluence of making poor decisions about buildings and needing to do them again, you know, 50 years later. But now we're at a point where we've done that. So that's great. And as Kate said, there's all these other little things, you know, there's all these little projects and there's a building coming up, you know, public safety building. And my point to master planning is it's kind of done already. You can do all the process you want. It'll be kind of done. We make that decision to build that public safety building and put some air conditioning and who knows what. And to Erin's point, we're done, right? That's it for us for a while.
Yeah, for years, not just for.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I don't think they get that, you know, I just don't think they get that.
Well, that's it. You don't want to pick the wrong project and say, we'll do this. And then 2 years down the road, have another one.
Well, we have to pick. So we have the pressure now, you know, to decide because we've got this aging police station that's not worth fixing and this aging fire station. And, you know, they were saying, well, community center didn't really resonate. So, okay, you know, Highland, I'm sorry, you know, right?
Well, in that context, I think we were talking last night, I think, and Kate, this really speaks to what you talk about all the time, and that is a few years ago, the select board and the finance committee and the town agreed that it was time to really do something about facilities. And I hope whatever decisions ultimately get made about a building, that it doesn't happen in such a way as to undercut this years-long, multi-year effort to deal with facilities. It would, in an ideal world, you do that first, but I recognize, David, we don't operate in an ideal world and there may be overlap, but I think it's important to stay on course with working on facilities, whatever.
I think, I don't want to speak for everybody, but my sense is our boards are all supportive that, we call it Josh Kablotsky, vision here, that we precisely need what you said. We need that multi-year town-wide look at all of our physical infrastructure and plan it. And, it's been a bumpy process, but we are getting to that point where we have a single committee that looks at that. And I believe, Kate, right, we're supportive of all that. We would not sacrifice that.
Over my dead body. Well, and the other thing is, it doesn't make sense to build a new building if you're not going to plan to maintain it. Everything takes maintenance.
Everything has a life and costs money.
Yes.
And you need that dry powder for elevators that bust and waters that don't, wells that don't.
Big building, you need people to clean it, then the electricity goes up, the insurance, there are other elements that add on the budget on that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Yeah. I just would like to reiterate that we're on that schedule. We hope to stay aligned with you through this. I think if, as a board, you have, some decisions you're making, please let us know.
Yeah, we will do that. And I think the other thing you're probably looking for is some idea of what kind of a number we're looking at in terms of percentage or dollar amount. And my impression is we're looking at something close to what Finance Committee is looking at as well.
Okay, well, that's helpful.
Yeah.
And again, we will share information with you Monday night. Barney, I hope we can get a cleaner looking draft budget to share with you and with the board.
Great.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I guess we need to have a motion to adjourn our portion of the meeting. Did I have a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee?
I move to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting.
I'll second.
Hey, James?
Paccio, aye.
Dar, aye.
Lee, aye.
Liang, aye.
Lipinski, aye.
Did Melissa leave?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just popped in to say a few words.
You just wanted to contradict David, that's all.
You need some fun.
David, you're muted.
I noticed that. She stealthily came in.
like a Deus Ex Machina. Well, thank you all and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take the rest of the night off.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right. Town administrators report.
Okay. The first item in my report, we saw this last time at last meeting, the acceptance of the open space deed for the Woodward Village project. Part of the special permit for that project. David Friedman was here to explain that. Town Council Chris Heap has reviewed the deed to make sure it had not changed since the last time he reviewed it, and he said it was identical, and he recommends that the board accept the deed and execute the agreement at a later date, because we do need original signatures in order to have this recorded at the registry.
Okay, let me see. I've got the wrong thing up here.
And then, so do you need a motion for that?
Yes, if the board would vote to accept the open space deed for the project.
I move that the board accepts the open space deed for Woodward Village.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote.
Arnold, aye.
Pascalillo, aye.
Lewis, aye.
Odell, aye.
Reed, aye.
Motion is unanimously passed.
Okay, so we have to come in and sign that for you?
Yes, we'll send you an email when that's ready, because the Conservation Commission also approved this last week, and I don't think they're done signing it yet. So as soon as we get it,
Yeah, I talked to Sylvia today. I know Lee was coming in to sign it today, so I don't know if she was the last one or the first one to sign it, but okay.
we'll let you know when that happens. Okay, item number 2, we've got a request again from the Timber Nook program for the use of the Conant property this summer from July 5th through August 13th. Their summer program. I think last year, from all accounts, things went well. There were some bumps in the road and issues we had to raise with them, and they resolved them very quickly, and they were good to work with. And I think the board, certainly could approve the program for another summer if you're so inclined. I think it went well last summer.
Okay, I move that the board approve Timber Nook's request to use the Conant property for summer programming between July 5th and August 13th of this year, provided that they submit a current certificate of liability insurance acceptable to the town prior to the start of their program.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Tim, so does this mean that they would, if they wanted to do some, like, are they planning to do programming this spring? Because I know they were doing some programming last fall and into the early winter. Is this the next thing they're going to be doing, or are they doing something this spring as well?
I'll have to check on that. If maybe they requested something in the fall or the a few months ago that they're going to do in the spring. I'll confirm that and get back to you.
Yeah, and then okay, yeah, it would just be good to know. I've had a few people ask me about it, and so yeah, it'd be good for us to know.
Okay.
I think it's been a good program. I've heard some positive feedback.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Arnold, I.
Oskalilowite, aye.
Louis, I.
Modell, I.
Need I?
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, the third item is that letter from the state regarding the state vaccine program. It's old news by now. I think we all know that the state is clearly supporting the large vaccination sites and the ones in more urban areas over sort of standalone sites in more rural communities, thought to be less in need of that. I think Alan mentioned earlier that the letter of intent was prepared by the health agents in 8 communities in this region. Acton, Bedford, Concord, and Carlisle, 4 of them. I can't think of them all right now, but that letter is going in this week. We have an indication that in terms of approving regional vaccination programs, that there's already perhaps a bias from the state that they do not want to see sort of rotating programs, as we might be looking to do with these communities, where clinics would be, one day in Concord, one day in Carlisle, one day in Bedford. They're looking to approve static regional sites. That's their preference, but we don't know until we ask if we'd be considered to be regional sites. So that letter has gone in, and we'll see what the state has to say about it. So fingers crossed they approve us as a regional program.
But why would they? What incentive do they have to approve Little Carlisle?
Well, when you do look at the map of the approved sites around the state, there's a bit of a gap in this area of Middlesex County. So I think that might be running in the favor of the communities out here, that there's really, I mean, there are programs that are fairly close by in Lowell, or, you can go certainly into Boston, but there's really nothing in this, the kind of the core of this area. So
you're saying, like, among those towns you mentioned earlier, are we the only ones with a tent?
No,
Concord has one.
Concord has a facility as well. A tent, I guess you'd call it. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of
others have buildings.
Go
I mean, we would do it probably as a drive-through if we did it here, but other people do it as we walk into a building. But, and again, this is kind of a trial balloon that's being sent to the state to see what kind of reaction they'll have, and there'll probably be some back and forth on it. It's unclear what all's going on.
But I mean, I guess Kate and others here who qualify for tier 2 should comment, but it's sort of solving itself, right? I mean, I'm observing that those eligible, particularly the 65 to 75-year-old who are both eligible and also computer savvy, which you can't say about the earlier ones, are just going to go getting their shots, right? I mean, vaccines are happening around us, so.
They are, but we're still, I mean, we think that current of the 460 or so people over the age of 75, we think we've probably got less than 200 of them have been vaccinated.
Right, because that group really needs the help because they,
right.
Have more challenges.
And unfortunately, if they keep moving the age limit down, they'll never get the help.
Right. So I'm trying to understand our ask. Is our ask to say we would like to be a regional center or whatever to serve that group that is challenged to get to Lowell General or whatever it is?
Well, yes, but it also by having it, you would also serve the other eligible groups. Right. But it would make it available to people who currently it's not available to.
Right.
And it's
but I
the
wonder
vulnerable segment.
Since the major bottleneck is source of supply constraint, if supply constraint were not an issue, would the other thing go away anyway? Would they all be able to go to CVS and get it and who knows what?
Probably not. But it's unclear. I mean, CVS is making money by doing it. And it's been that's an issue which we probably shouldn't talk about too much, but
no, I mean, that's neither here nor there, but I mean, yeah. Luke, you're quiet there, but Luke, you have some actual knowledge in this area, right?
Well, I mean, not necessarily in the COVID space, but yeah, I mean, well, yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know if I have anything to really add more so than, I guess, I understand why the state is doing the larger centers and all of that. I mean, we saw it with the testing and now we're seeing it with vaccinations, but yeah, I think ultimately in order to get, as Alan said, as they keep changing it, right, as they keep moving the target down, it's going to be harder and harder for that older population. I mean, I'm trying to sign my parents up and I haven't been able to.
Yeah, we're trying to do the same, man.
Yeah. So it's just, I mean, it'd be, I don't know if that actually helps saying that, hey, we're going to make it for, the population that can't get out, but.
Well, I'm looking, right, exactly. I'm looking for some angle.
Yeah.
That would maybe make Carlisle stand out in that. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of communities writing what we're writing. If we could just say that, like, hey, we bought a tent, we have an aging population. We need to serve them locally because they're not mobile, blah, 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 blah. Maybe we have some other way we can.
Well, we do. We have said that, and others have said it for us as well.
Yeah.
Strongly.
Yeah.
The problem is they don't want to send out vaccines in less than 750 lots, and we're not prepared to do that.
We'll take a lot of 750.
Yeah, but it's but the other thing is when they move it down, and we're not vaccinating 1,000, we're now going to be vaccinating 5,000 or 4,000. Then they may well say, okay, towns, you do this. And so we don't know. There doesn't seem to be a plan, and without a plan, it's hard to predict. What we've decided to do is continue to request our 100 doses, which is what they said we can request. We'll try to be regional, which will make things more convenient for our elderly folks here and everybody else, by the way. And if it changes, then we'll be in the good position to take advantage of it. But all we can do is ask. I mean, there's no downside to it.
What is the capacity that Carlisle could actually do? I mean, even if we didn't regionalize, officially with the state, if we regionalized informally with, say, Concord, right? I don't know how many people we have that could do the vaccinations. And ultimately, if we requested the 750, right? Could we get to that point where we could make the large request? You know, do we have I mean, all you need is 1 minus 80 to store that, right? Can we combine with another town to have the infrastructure to do it? You know, but just in a sense, have an informal agreement with another town and run it through Carlisle, right? You know, I mean, because you see a lot of these little health clinics, what they're doing is, you know, there's a lot of stuff kind of central Mass and Western Mass, you know, that it's 5 or 6 towns, but it's run through like a central health clinic, right? So if we requested the 750, right, you know, obviously we probably wouldn't have the capacity to dose that many people in a day, right? I mean, we're not Gillette.
But you could do it. You could do it in a weekend.
Yeah, right. Well, that's just it, right? So, I mean, if you know, if you got the capacity to, if you had some place to store it, right? You know, is it something that we could do 750, make it local, right? You know, combine with say like a Concord or something unofficially, and just do it in 750 vaccine kind of crunches. You know what I mean?
The answer is probably yes, we could. We don't have the population to support that. The problem right now is that if you look at your eligible people, we don't have that number, and so we can't justify those numbers. But it's the kind of thing that.
Do we not? I mean, if we combine,
if we combine 65 and up, we do.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's what's eligible.
If you can get everyone to come in on a weekend.
Yeah. But you know, I mean, I think, you know, and what if we also made it available to town employees, you know, and folks that
well, you can't do that.
Why not?
You're not allowed to. Yeah.
Even frankly, their rollout, you know, and their announcement of the 65 and up. I mean, they did that with, normally they were doing everything, oh, well, in 2 weeks or, you know, but they did that. They said, tomorrow it's going to be 65. And I mean, of course, then what happened is everything crashed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they have been not doing a good job of this. And
the other thing, Luke, is that the regional plan anticipates they would be hiring staff to do it.
Yeah, no,
it wouldn't be totally relied on volunteers to run it. Which would make things much simpler. Accountability would be easier. Record keeping would be easier. All that kind of thing. So that's one of the reasons. But
yeah, they want that permanent piece. Yeah, which I get. Yeah.
But anyway, that's the current plan. So
it's like nailing Jello to the wall. That's really.
And I will say, I mean, the places that I've visited are run very professionally. I mean, it is just a piece of cake. If you can just get an appointment, you do well. And by the way, our COA has been absolutely fantastic at getting appointments for people.
Yes.
We are set up. I mean, if we get vaccine, we can take care of everybody in this town really easily. I mean, they've got call center set up. They're really ready to go, and so it's just a matter of getting the vaccine.
That's why it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Right. And so much time and money has been at the urging of the state originally, right?
Yeah.
And and again, I mean, right now there's not even a single reservation system. I mean, if you want to go to Lowell, you go to their site. You don't go to the VaxFinder site. It's very strange, but anyway, it's where it is.
It is what it is. Okay.
All right. Moving forward, I've got the next 3 meeting dates scheduled for you. We're going to continue tonight's executive session to the March 9th meeting. Also, looking to have an update on the Highland building at that meeting, as well as
That'll be exciting.
I'd like to, but not only what the committee's doing, but we've got a communication from our insurance company today asking for our plan for this building before they're going to reinsure it for us. So I think it's
actually that would be
time
nice
to talk about that plan.
Yeah, if you could have the about how much we currently pay for insurance on that building.
For insurance, it's just shy of $5,000, I think, for that building.
Gee.
We had to insure it separately from
Right, right.
the
Well,
rest of the town's
it's
facilities.
another data point that is very important for us to keep in mind.
Mhm. Okay.
And when did we say the official kind of working group was going to be set up for the public facilities exploration?
Yeah, we didn't vote on that the last time.
No, we didn't.
No, because we needed to look at the membership of it.
I don't think we, have we? I
No,
don't think we've
No,
had
we
a
have
time.
not.
I don't,
Let's put that on March 9th as well.
yeah, because that should be on the agenda.
Yep. That'll remind us we have to do it.
Sure. Okay, and we heard tonight the Finance Committee would like to come back on March 23rd to finalize the
Yeah,
FY22 budget, so we'll do
So-
that.
where in this process, where in these next few meetings, are we going to look at some of the potential warrant articles that will involve money? Because we need to, if we're closing the warrant a couple weeks later, don't we need to sort of figure out where we stand on them, and also
Well, we
how
don't need to close the
how
warrant
that might impact the
May.
budget? Say it again?
Yeah.
We don't need to close the warrant until May.
Well, that's true. It's
Oh,
whenever the
oh, you've
board.
got finalized ATM warrant. Oh, so you mean just the operating budget part of it?
Right, well, I think I was thinking of warrant articles too, but you don't formally have to close the warrant.
Right.
And with a June 5th town meeting, you've got a little more time than usual. But to your point, the board first has to decide what's on the warrant. You don't have to take positions on those articles until much later,
Right.
if you want some more time to think about it. But
so I actually did write to Madeline about another thing, but I asked her where they are with the marijuana, and she would like to bring the marijuana for, so that might be, that's not a money article, but that might be
Right.
in the warrant.
Why,
yeah,
why do we have that? Didn't we cover that a while back?
No, we did, but it had to be revisited because of, I forget why.
Well, the
Didn't get
presentation was
approved.
so,
Right back, yes.
was so confusing that, yeah.
Yeah, here it is. It is on the,
But what if we don't take it up? Does it just go away, or we have to take it up?
Well, it stays on the books as is, which essentially allows anything.
Right.
Yeah, anything, anywhere.
Yeah.
Mind you, we haven't had
I
exactly.
mean, are we having an outbreak of people, getting wandering into your traffic circle? I mean,
Dispensary in the middle. Yeah. Right in the center of it.
That's right.
A drive around.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, we got guidance from, what's his name, that we should have a brief meeting, right?
Oh, from Wayne.
Oh,
Wayne,
Wayne.
yeah, Wayne, yeah.
Yep.
yeah, okay, well, let's
Well,
see, these are things that, that I think we want to carry on here until we decide how brief the meeting
So
is.
when do we, but I got a little confused. So I understand we don't have to take a position right away, but when do we have to finalize this list?
Right.
You got 3 things at the bottom that are gonna double the length of the meeting.
right. Well, normally with an April town meeting, you'd be finalizing the warrant for publication in the middle of March, let's say.
Right.
So you can push it out another month or
Okay.
6 weeks, let's say.
So what I'm hearing is we should nail the budget piece with the FinCom
Yes.
next meeting, and then we can kind of, then
On
we
the
can.
On the
23rd.
23rd. Yeah.
Right.
I don't mean, right, I don't mean the next meeting,
Yeah.
but within the month, let's say.
And then,
And then either April 13th or the following, we should have a decisions on that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
but even on the operating budget, in the request for increases in hours or new positions that are not the school, we need as a body to decide, to discuss, how we feel about that, right?
But we have to vote on it. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're saying we don't need to take a position as a select board until closer to town meeting?
We'll take,
No, that's on bow hunting and things like that.
yeah, that would be in the budget.
I think what we're saying, Barney, is we need to come to a general agreement on the budget, which as Alan and
Right, so
Jim were
that's-
saying at the end of that piece, that we are kind of in alignment on that.
but we haven't
We didn't put
we haven't
forward a
looked
budget we don't
specifically
support.
we haven't looked at some of the requests and how we feel as a board about them. That
No, but that's the month from now. I think what we're saying is we bifurcate them, right? We have that first. And we shouldn't put forward a budget we don't ourselves support. That would be silly.
right. So I'm just saying, are we going to talk about that before we have the joint meeting with FinCom? Or are we going to do it together when FinCom is presenting their proposed budget?
It might even be the week after they've presented it, so that we have time to think about it and talk about it. It does not have to be done together. This will be a budget proposal that they're going to present to us. We'll take it and discuss and think about it and decide whether we would support it. We could even go back to them and ask them to make some adjustments if we had to.
Okay, so we're not talking about then the select board and the finance committee coming to, some agreement about a budget on April 13th.
Well, hopefully we will. March
23rd.
March 23rd. Hopefully March 23rd, they're going to bring us a budget that we will be, in support of.
Yeah.
And if we were not in support of it, then we still have time to dicker with them. And we don't, by the way, have to both support the same budget.
Right.
Because it has happened in the past.
Right, but what I'm
No, but
trying to
it's not a-
right.
yeah.
So what I'm trying to get at is, though, for instance, the COA requests, the the finance department increase in hours.
Where are you looking? I'm sorry, are you looking at something?
No, I'm just telling this off the top of my
Oh,
head.
okay, okay.
Those things which we know are in the budget requests from those departments.
Oh, we have not told the FinCom yet what our position is on those things.
Right, and if we don't support them, then rather than have them come to us with a budget that includes them, right?
Got it.
We have some conversation among ourselves.
All right.
Yeah, but
Now I understand what you're getting at.
Yeah,
I agree in part with what Barney's saying, but, I want to raise my hand as a 9-year member of the FinCom. The job of the FinCom has been deputized by the select board to be the vetting agency for these things. And we should respect that. We doesn't mean we have to accept everything, but to me, the process is they're doing the hard work, meeting all the time with all these guys to precisely ferret out those priorities and present what they believe is their plan. And the first thing is really to just think about what they're presenting as a whole package. And then if there are specific things we don't like and we want to talk to them about, we should do so. But we are not the second vetting of this thing. We are.
No, actually,
no, but
what we've been doing in past years, David, is those departments come to us just as they've already come to us. And we support or don't support their.
Honestly, I think that's a stupid and inefficient process.
Well,
If we don't trust the FinCom to do it, we should have a different.
wait, David, I think I see the FinCom a little differently. I absolutely agree with you that they have responsibility for, presenting to us a budget that they feel is fiscally, appropriate.
Yeah.
But the question of whether or not there are services that there are needs that need to be met in the town, that's much more of a, that's not a FinCom decision. That's the select board looking at the town's needs overall and saying, well, maybe because of the change in the responsibilities of the Board of Health, we do believe that their workload is increased and therefore they should, get that they need this other position. That's looking at the the needs of the community, not from a financial standpoint, but from a
have to say-
programmatic and community standpoint. And I'm just saying, you don't want to have the if the FinCom knows that we don't support X proposal for more hours for a department, why have them go through the exercise of trying to fit it into the budget, only to hear from us later that in fact
But that's
we
a
don't
preamble.
support it.
So, right. So let me unpack what you're saying. First of all, I have to challenge you because I spent a lot more time in FinCom meetings than you have. The FinCom
David,
should exactly look at the
David,
FinCom should.
Don't go that way. Just
All right.
tell me what you think.
I'm telling you what I think.
But
That
don't
the FinCom can figure out what it needs budget-wise in about 2 meetings. It's the other 12 meetings where they actually granularly go through each department and have those discussions just like we do. And I believe that you're right. I agree with you that we should priority set at the global level ahead of time so that they don't waste their time. But I very much disagree that we should be this extraordinary or on top of petition board where they don't like the answer from the FinCom, so they go to us. I really believe, and maybe it's not this.
No, I did not suggest that.
No, but you're going there with that kind of line of thinking.
No, I'm not. I'm trying to suggest that, the budget should reflect the priorities that we as the select board.
Right, but that's a
believe
thing we do at the
ought to
beginning.
be. Well, we haven't done it as clearly then maybe as we could have. And in general, David, my experience since being on this board is that we've kind of done this process that's sort of concurrent.
I think it's
this always I raised
but
this.
It's not right. It's not be that way. That's a waste of time every time. Have the FinCom even do it.
Well, can we back up for just a second? And Luke, maybe you'll have to, check me on these, but it seems to me about 3 years ago, the FinCom came to us and said, when we're asked for all these extra hours, we don't really know what to do with it. And nobody seems to know what the process is for getting these extra hours that they want. So between the FinCom and us, and as I recall, the Personnel Board, we worked out sort of a timeline and a process. People that wanted extra hours or extra positions in their department came to us first, the Select Board. If we thought this was something that we would entertain and that we thought was something that was really necessary for the operation, we sent them then to Personnel. Personnel, they were not there to approve the position. They were there just to make sure that those hours really were kind of needed. And if there was any adjustment in the pay scale that was going to have to be attendant with that, they would make a recommendation to that, which then came back to us. And then we told FinCom, and then we told FinCom, we approve this position or don't approve it, whichever way. And the reason that happened was because it was, well, but mommy said, but daddy said, and so they were, departments were kind of working both ends against the middle. So that's kind of how our process has gone. And that's what we have not.
That part's fine.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
So
I'm not fine with telling FinCom to go do something and then undoing it later after they've done it. I'm not fine with that.
Does FinCom, the question is, on these personnel items, does FinCom have a clear enough picture from us what we support or don't yet on some of these requests?
What is the purpose of the departments going to FinCom with their requests and justifications if they come to us first?
Well, they're supposed to only come to really, they're supposed to come to us. And then they go, once we kind of give them, the blessing, Then they go to FinCom with the requests and the justifications, and FinCom decides whether they can afford it or not. But I don't want to put FinCom through that whole thing of, well, we can afford it, but then we don't support that position. So we might very well be able to afford it, but we don't want it to be spent there.
Well,
Right.
I agree with David. I think the process is convoluted, and you're doing things twice. And
Right, but the Board of Selectmen is the initial vetting, and then if it passes us, then it goes to FinCom. You know, it's as Kate said, you know.
So you're saying we should tell Fin, somebody comes and says, I need 3 more people. We should say, yep. Now, and you tell FinCom, okay, go fund it, put it in your budget. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, so no. If we say yup, right, FinCom can turn around and say you can't afford it. You know, let's have a conversation and figure it out. But you know, it's really up to us to say, you know, to turn around and say, I mean, we've done it to Chief Fisher how many years in a row with his officer request. You know, no, and it never goes to FinCom because we just don't support it. You know.
Well, and I agree. And I questioned this 2 meetings ago or a meeting ago too, and on the order of things, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, if that's going to be the order, then we ought to put it in writing and say this is the way we're going to do it. But it doesn't. And that when we get a proposal from these departments, we're going to have to treat it much more seriously than we do right now, because we hear their request, we don't really discuss it in great detail,
Right.
and then we send it on to FinCom, and they make the same request to FinCom.
But they're not supposed to be making that request from FinCom if we haven't told them that we support it.
Right.
But we haven't told them that.
But
no, but I think a
It's
memo
our
did go out
failure.
a few years ago. You know, I mean, I think, you know, because this was back, it might have even been before you were on the board, Kate. That a memo did go out, you know, about the process, you know, come to the board first, because it was exactly what Kate was saying. You know, people would come to us, then people would go to FinCom, and I hate to say it, but people would flat out lie. Oh, well, FinCom said this. And so you go, oh, well, FinCom support, you know, so it changes your mindset when we've never had the conversation with FinCom. And then what happens is, you know, we both go in thinking that the other group supports it. And then, you know, you have this one-off conversation and you go, wait a second. You know, and then it leads to mass confusion.
Right. So let me go back. I want to, you know, I don't want to waive all my experience and I'm sorry I, you know, said what I said, but in the years that I was FinCom and guys like Tim Holt were on select board, and I believe should take the big picture view, tackle the big stuff. And the FinCom is perfectly knowledgeable, and they represent, if you look at who's on there now, and some of them are on the call still, and you know, Victor, or Lynn, if you want to chime in, I'm happy to hear from you. There's plenty of experience sitting there. And the idea that the departments come, they make their case, it's, you know, weighed against all the requests that they see and their overall lens of affordability, to me is a perfectly good process. And then they come to select board and say, this is what we did, and these are the things that we issued. And if they have certain issues that they're not clear of, they can get guidance from us. I believe that would be a more robust process. And we're silly if we think we as select board are somehow so much more knowledgeable about the objectives of the town than that FinCom. And again, Victor or Lynn, if you are still there, if you want to chime in, I'm happy to.
Yeah, this is Lynn. You know, so David, you make a good point, but on the other hand, we really do sit there and agonize. We really shouldn't be making decisions in terms of what the overall town needs are. For example, we're not in a position to say whether we should agree or disagree to add a full-time policeman, because it's a public safety issue. So we really do want to understand, and it doesn't have to be set in stone, but it's really important for us to understand what are the select board's priorities for the year? Like what are their goals? And that really is what's helpful for us to give us guidance. And to your point, be able to say, well, this just isn't going to work. And if we do this, something's going to have to fall away. So so it's a bit of a blurred line, but, and I don't think you're saying this, but it really isn't it isn't in our purview to make those decisions ultimately in terms of what's in the best interest of the town. So
Yeah, so
that's
you're
where
bringing
we're
up,
looking for
you're
the
bringing up
balance.
two very good things, Lynn. One is we, and I've said this before, we should be goal setting with you ahead of time, in the summer, in the fall, about the priorities. That's global, and absolutely we should do that, no question. The other piece, which maybe, FinCom should take on, is come back to us with those one-offs. If you came back and said, we're scratching our head over this extra policeman, we need some help here, then we can take that issue on. I think that's absolutely appropriate. I just worry that you tidy up a budget and then we come in after the fact and we say, well, we don't really think that, and we actually think you should add some hours to the health agent, blah, blah, blah. I just don't, it's undermining the process, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I would take away
add
both things you said. We should goal set. We should mutually goal set ahead of time, and it won't be this year, obviously. And we should encourage you to come back to us with the requests that you believe are outside your purview.
Mhm.
So I can
Victor?
add to this from a process perspective, and this is kind of where we went with the way we kind of frame it out. I think the first coordination meeting, at least when I was chair, was really to talk about those overarching direction before the budget process even started, and that typically happened in September. I think the other thing I would add is, obviously we take that, we'd begin to work with the departments, we'd have those long meetings with them, then we begin to develop kind of a viewpoint on the budget, affordability and such. I think the second piece that goes into it, which is a little bit more granular underneath the overarching priorities for the town, is really around personnel. And I think even before I was chair, we wrestled over that because it was this whole aspect of, talking to FinCom, talking to personnel board, talking to the select board, and all these different, gyrations and orders and such. I think the way that we landed on, and there was work done around that part of the process, is that personnel is really something that select board really needs to put definition to as to what is important and what needs to be considered for funding. So the process was, I think it was Kate who highlighted it, is that the select board essentially for that particular part of the budget would vet through whether they support additional staffing for Department XYZ. Then personnel board obviously go, well, how much would that cost? What type of role is it? What are the responsibilities? And then they would come to FinCom to say, well, this is a priority. Here are the responsibilities. This is the cost. And then we would now sort through the ability of the town to fund it versus all the other priorities we may have. And so, I think the answer is both is right? We looked at it from an overarching goal perspective. Obviously, COVID has kind of thrown that out the window this year for the process, but we did kick that off before COVID, the process of the years before COVID. We did that for a couple of years, but then we had done a lot of work, and we found that to have the select board think through, is this role necessary to be considered? That was kind of the first step of the process. Then personnel board to kind of put more meat underneath it, and the finance committee at the very end of that to say, okay, if it's a priority, if this is how much it costs, can the town afford it? And then we kind of factor that in our discussions. So I think that I just kind of put the frame around a lot of the different comments that were made, and they were all right, actually. It's just how you fit them together.
So I would say this year, we have already, we have supported a new IT person and a new HR person, but I do not think that we have supported, and we've supported the BOH nurse, but I do not think we've supported extra hours for BOH. And what other ones are there?
Police.
Well, police we haven't seen. We haven't been asked for that.
And the finance department, extra hours.
And then extra hours in the finance department. And I don't think that got any support, but I could be wrong.
But listen, Kate, I don't recall us as a select board having a conversation or taking a vote on whether or not we supported having a GIS person or a personnel director. I mean, I know Tim proposed that in his budget, but that's not something that we as a select board, you were just saying we supported it, but unless I missed something, we have not had a conversation at the select board level where we said we were all in agreement that should
Well,
be.
I guess I assumed that because that was one of our board goals, to have, more IT support in-house IT support. That
Yeah, but we didn't deliberate that in
Yeah,
a select board meeting.
Right. And, you know, we
didn't
did,
deliberate the budget item.
Right.
right. Right.
What's the matter with you? What's the matter with you?
So how do we move forward then as a select board? It seems to me we do need to plan out some conversations about some of these specific items. And if you want to wait until the FinCom presents their budget, we could do that since it's pretty far along already.
I'd rather do it
Yeah,
before
I
next meeting.
think the sooner the better, yeah.
Yeah. I'd say we do it at our next meeting and then, and
we'll have their report early next week.
Their draft budget,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and then we write them a memo back so that they have time before the 23rd to take our positions into consideration.
So what we need then for our conversation is we need to have some idea. I know, Tim, you have the positions you were talking about in your budget. You have dollar figures attached to those, don't you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
do we have dollar figures attached to the Board of Health requests?
We do. We do.
Yeah. And then the extra hours request from the Finance Department?
I believe we do as well. I think we can kind of put all those requests and the impact
Okay.
of them together so that the board could review that on the 9th and
Okay.
transmit any recommendation to the finance committee or priorities.
Yeah.
I think that would be important for us to do.
I agree. I think that's the appropriate way to go.
Yeah, so there's also, isn't there the COA reorg?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was actually revenue. No, she changed it. Was it no longer revenue neutral? It got.
Yeah, I don't
Right.
think it is, because then there are benefits and everything. too.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
it was revenue neutral when she met with you. When she went to the personnel committee, they regraded the position, so it came out at a higher rate. So it actually
Oh.
flipped it on its head, but
okay. So
So I
let's
guess
have
we
them
need
all
that
to get.
as
I
well.
think
Yeah.
rather than get piecemealing it to us, dribs and drabs. Once we've seen those,
Right.
then we need to see them all at once
Yep.
because I don't see how we can do it otherwise.
Yeah.
Right.
okay.
Yeah, along with the justifications.
Yeah.
And so how do we want to handle the police officer then?
I can ask the chief for the
I w-
information he presented to FinCom.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would like to know how many FTEs he has and how many of the FTEs are full-time,
I think,
full FTEs and how many are part-time FTEs. I think that would be helpful for us to know.
yeah, I think he has 11 or 12 full-time. Yeah.
But if you're gonna apply, I don't disagree with that, but if you're gonna apply that metric, then you gotta look at schools, right?
No, we have no jurisdiction. We may not do the schools. And that's statutory, right? All we can do for school is give them
Up or
a
down?
number, an upper limit.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I am, on the other hand, concerned to hear that they want 5 new positions with this, so I would be interested in sitting in one of those, meetings to find out how they're justifying that with, flat enrollment. And if it is a matter of sped and they're beefing up, they're putting a new program.
Two or three of them are that, but
It-
there's
so-
also, yeah.
So if it's not,
There's an enrollment issue that I can tell you, there's an enrollment issue that drives one. even though you say the enrollment's flat, you can't look at it that way. You have to look at each class makeup and whether the classes fall inside the guidelines, right? So there's an
Agreed.
enrollment that's
Right.
one, and there's sped, and again, they're not FTEs, right? They're 5 postings, but I believe, and I'm going by old data, but I believe that the 3 of the 5 are not full-time. So, you know, they're paras or whatever, they help out.
Okay, well,
But you're saying, okay, so we accept it. I mean, you're right. We cap but okay, so maybe we can't
I'm
weigh in on
leaving
the
up to
details.
that is not our,
Well, no.
absolutely not our purview.
Yeah, but okay, so it's not our purview to say you can't hire like a sped professional or whatever, but when we come to parameterizing the overall increase that the school should represent, we can have an opinion on that, right?
We can have opinion on it, but I think usually personally, I let the FinCom lead on that one.
Well, okay, but see, this is part of my issue. I don't disagree, but you say, FinCom, please vet the $13 million budget. Oh, but we're gonna drill down on the $2,000 impact of an extra, hours for the health agent.
Because that's the only thing we get to do.
But it's not logical. It's not logical. Let's be more logical. I mean, maybe not this year, but let's be better. We got to be better than that. That's just crazy. I believe the FinCom can deal with those things. I really.
And we have to put that policy out to the people so they know what they're dealing with too. So they know who they have to justify to.
Right.
But we can turn around and say, we think the school budget's too high.
Yep.
We can absolutely say that the school budget needs to be only 60% of the town budget, not 66% or whatever, because council on aging population, those are big picture things we should weigh in on. Those are hundreds of thousands of dollars.
We haven't dared to do that. We just haven't dared to do that up until now.
No, but let's stay big picture. And the idea, and the police officers, in the middle kind of, because it's $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. But for us to overdo this about these other little hours, to me, is just a waste of our time and it's a waste of everybody's time.
Okay. So anyway, we're going to have this on the agenda for the 9th.
Okay.
We'll deal with the personnel issues. Okay. All right. Anything further? Oh, yes, there's a lot of things further.
Yeah.
Liaison reports.
Okay. I'll start. The trailer is being delivered to the DPW on Friday. So that'll be nice. I got a dig safe number for them so that they'll be able to even tie it down. So, and we're making progress on a number of other things, but that was the biggie for the facilities. I think I'll leave it at that. Well, yeah, that's good enough.
Anybody else? Okay. All right. We don't have any minutes to approve.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Yeah. Shall we accept the warrants?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay. And that concludes our agenda for this evening.
Oh, thank God.
Motion to adjourn.
And that, excuse me a sec, but that's the other thing that's going to be on the next select board meeting, right? Is the executive session.
Yes.
Right, we're bumping it to, okay.
Yep. Yeah, that was simply a calendar conflict.
Okay.
From one of the parties. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, roll call vote.
Arnold, I.
Oscar, aye.
Lewis, aye.
Reed, aye.
Thank you very much.
You are
Spirited meeting, folks.